We've talked about it in the past where, college esports, it's becoming a thing. You have a lot more universities acknowledging it on a scholarship level, right? A varsity level for college esports. So joining us right now, our very special guest, a college esports coach for Midland University, Nathan Ragsdell, and the assistant coach, Sinjin, for their League of Legends team. Hello, gentlemen.
Hi there.
Hey.
I mean, there's a lot of questions I have. We won't take up your whole night, though, getting into the weeds about college and how their views on esports.
Mm-hmm.
But in this situation, who approached who first with Midland University making esports an official scholarship sport?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting perfect storm situation where there are these kids who knew each other on campus and they just wanted to start up their own gaming club. I think the league was their first game of choice, and they talked someone into making a club for them and providing them a space. They would game here and there, and then it actually wasn't until our new president, Jody Horner, she came on board, and she has had this platform of being relevant and forward thinking and being on the cutting edge of things, and happened to be in a conference with some of our colleagues, and they mentioned esports, and it was kind of like a flippant thing, like, oh yeah, esports, that's a thing. But to her, she was like, ah, wow, that sounds like it could be great, it could be huge. And she brought it to a couple guys, found the nerds on campus essentially, and we're just like, hey, how can we go about making this happen? And it became like one guy talks to this guy talks to that guy, and they start meeting with the maintenance guys to figure out how to build the arena, where to build the arena. And it's just kind of like one thing led to another, and eventually they got themselves together to start up the program. And it happened to be at the time that esports was really like picking up speed in the at the higher education field, and organizations like NAC Esports, or NACE, and TESPA were starting to come out and make their appearance. And then I'm pretty sure Sinjin can speak more to this. He's my league guy, but league has already had their fair share of experience with collegiate tournaments and what have you.
So with you, Nathan, when you say you are head coach of Midland University's esports, you kind of overlook all of their league, Hearthstone, and any other future one going into the mix. You're kind of the head of all that, and then you what's the word I'm looking for?
Kind of hire the people underneath, the assistant to the regional manager type thing, where they help you out on the specific sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I would say that's pretty much how it works. I think that right now, for a lot of universities that are not the uninitiated into video game world and esports in general, they don't realize that each game is like its own sport. Mm-hmm. So a lot of places have just like a head coach for esports, and it kind of encompasses pretty much everything, kind of like a director would essentially. But it is so new that's kind of like why one person kind of does it all. And also we're a smaller school. We're in Fremont, Nebraska, which is nowhere near a big city by any means. So we don't have the benefit of being a super popular school in California or somewhere in by Chicago. Chicago actually had Robert Morris University was the first school to even start the eSport program, and they're right in the center of the mecca of cities in the Midwest, I would say. So
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I read about Robert Morris being the first one, and they started it off with a scholarship that offered somewhere around $20,000. Is this scholarship based for the students, or how does that work for them?
Yeah, so we were actually the 6th university, I believe, to scholarship esports as a varsity sport, and it's kind of a blank canvas for Midland specifically, just because they they had a part-time coach who started the position, but they didn't really know much about how they should go about really scholarshiping these kids, essentially, like what metrics to use. And the kind of way that we look at it is we have junior varsity and then varsity kind of being the really competitive side of things, obviously, like, typically, but those kids typically are the ones that their skill, they could easily go, not easily, but they have the potential to go pro,
Okay.
And so on a sliding scale, you kind of have higher end that will offer to those students, and then for the junior varsity, it's kind of like a static amount for those students who still want to compete and be involved, but they might not be the next big thing.
Are they treated like a typical student athlete in terms of what they're able to do to monetize themselves?
Yes, and I think that it's like when you ask that question, you means
like if they have a YouTube that they're making money on for doing like guide videos, or there's a Coursera.
In college football, it's very frowned upon. The players cannot make any money off of their name.
Yeah, like, or if Coursera reaches out and he's like, "Hey, I want you to put my name on your, these guys are streaming. Are they making money on stream? Are they able to do any of that stuff?"
It's kind of an unmarked territory right now. A lot of schools very specifically want their students to do streaming during practices, so that way they're always visible to the world, and their school's always being represented in some way. And as far as like where that money goes, I think each school kind of does it a little differently. We're also not part of, like, esports isn't legitimized in the sense that I mean, it might be for different universities. I can't speak to that, but they're not an NAIA sport,
right?
So
because I know like Big Ten, I know Big Ten has their League of Legends, so that might be governed completely different than the way you guys govern it. So go ahead, Brett. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, you admit, and Nathan, you had mentioned arenas, right? So is this a plan for the university to actually build a facility for the players to play and practice out of? Or, I mean, where are you playing your games right now?
We do have an arena right now.
Okay. So something dedicated?
Yep, a dedicated space for all the athletes that we have, which is another like interesting topic. Is like, what do we call these kids? I use the term athletes because I think
athletes is a generic term for competitor, right? We don't got to get into semantics. We all know it.
Right. That feels the best in my opinion, but people like to make jokes at that expense. But as you can imagine, I'm sure. But where was I? I'm sorry.
The arena.
The arena.
Right. The dedicated space and all that.
Right. Yeah. That was one of the main things they really wanted to do, and I think a lot of schools start there for sure. They want to have, it's like making sure you have all the equipment for your game. Essentially, like you want to have all the bats and you want to have a place to go play baseball. Having that field is important. So they recognize that early on, and they outfit it accordingly and make it look appropriate to pull in the students, which leads to a lot of really cool designs. It's one of the spaces, as far as like sports go, that pretty open for interpretation as far as like what you want it to look like. But yeah, it is very, very much a legitimate looking experience, as well as in operation.
So one thing question.
Go ahead, Tim.
Because I have a question for Sinjin. I want to get him involved here. As far as being like, you are the League of Legends assistant coach, but like the guy for League, right?
Yeah.
How do you approach getting players? Are you looking at people in the university? Are you looking at scouting reports? Like, how do you get players at the university?
So the number one way so I've done recruiting in the past, but not for colleges. I did it for challenger teams and things like that. And the number one way we did recruiting, and the method that I'm using right now, is to look at the League of Legends ladder and sort of find people of the position and rank that I need, and try to recruit them through Riot Games, League of Legends client, and things like that.
And then
how do you know what university they go to?
I was going to say, do you kind of like, hey, do you want to go to college?
Yeah, that's basically it. So I'm kind of shooting in the dark most of the time, as you could guess. They either aren't interested, or they're like 25 or something, and they've kind of gotten that part of their life over with. But if I say reach out to 50 people and I get one or two of them,
that's all you need.
eventually,
It's kind of a
yeah,
success.
that's all I need.
That's awesome. That's an aggressive way to do it. I really actually like that going out method.
As a guy who is getting these players, going out, recruiting, being a coach, and most coaches kind of view themselves as, like, in this case, you're getting kids prepped for life, right?
Yeah.
In college, that's kind of the whole spiel, right? What are your expectations for these guys? Because esports is a weird thing where you definitely don't need college, right? But even then, you have kids who are 15 who could really be pro at a pro level there. So are these guys, I know you said they could go pro or they have that potential. What's from stopping them from joining you and then signing with a full-on team at any point or things like that?
So, honestly, the people that do have the potential to become professional players are usually being scouted by League of Legends Academy teams. And what I see in the future of League of Legends Collegiate is that they become sort of the academy teams. And what I mean by academy is that each LCS team has a sort of like child team, and not like their children, but there's a parent team and there's
the farm
child
system.
Team. Yeah, and they cultivate those players and they eventually put them onto their teams or they get recruited somewhere else. And that being said, like most sports, traditional sports recruit from colleges.
Right.
There's big drafts every year for every sport, recruiting from colleges. And if we could get to that point in the future where collegiate and professional don't have that break, where they don't really have a connection right now. They don't really have one feeding into the other or one aiding the other. They're just kind of separate entities. So
I guess you can kind of speak more to it, just being like how you said you kind of did scouting in the past. It's like there is no real clear bridge, right, from being that or not even a semi-pro, just being a guy on the ladder to going pro. There is no clear bridge or path to do it. It's just kind of luck of the draw, like you said. If someone shoots you a message.
Yeah, so it kind of is luck of the draw, and it kind of isn't, because you do need someone to approach you usually. So if someone approached one of our players and they were like, "We want you to go pro," honestly, I would encourage them to do that because they would be making somewhere in the range of $300,000 a year. Right. And it would be a huge loss for us, but that's just something that I would have to risk.
And it's kind of a compliment to you guys, right? Getting like, oh, wow, like this, we have, like, you are attracting players on that level, right, to Midland.
Well, it's something to sell the next person in the program too, right? Like, look, hey, like this guy came here, he was recognized, and he got an opportunity to go pro. So it's just another selling tool.
Yeah.
One thing I was kind of curious about is obviously sports on college campuses are huge, right? Whether it's football, baseball, basketball, whatever it may be. How are esports treated amongst college students? Because I feel like it's that next generation of student that maybe understands it more. But how is the reputation amongst college students?
So, you go ahead.
You're the other one.
Okay. I can say, it's very well received, which is something that I wasn't necessarily expecting myself coming into this, which is that, I grew up in an era where if you played video games, you were a nerd, and, that was a bad thing. But now it's very much the opposite. And at least 80% of all of our student athletes at Midland play like a game or two that are considered like esport games. One of them being, and I say it slightly, but Fortnite is one of them, which is like, that's a point of,
that's kind of the attractive thing to Fortnite. I mean, we've talked about that a lot on the show, where for whatever reason you want to claim, Fortnite has captured every audience. So it's and you even have it like with Neymar in the World Cup, right? He did a Counter-Strike celebration yesterday, and then he put it on Instagram, I think it was, that after their match at the World Cup, Neymar went and played Counter-Strike with his teammates. So
they were all silvers, by the way, in case y'all were asking, except for Neymar was a 1-star.
I think that's his alt account. I actually do think he's like
he is good.
That's besides the point.
So I'm curious from a practice standpoint. So, in college, played a lot of video games. Probably too many hours in video games. But to be at that level, you had to grind out and put in the hours. how is that treated? Because I know in football, like college football, you have a certain amount of practices you can do, right? Mm-hmm. And you're limited to that. How is that treated with collegiate esports? Do you have a certain amount of time that you're allotted to practice? Mm-hmm. I mean, are these guys just doing it on their own, or how does that work?
It's treated very similarly. A lot of the faculty and staff that I've spoken to are, they know that a lot of these kids have the ability to go practice on their own time for 10 hours a day if they so choose. But they definitely treat it the same way that any other sport would be, where it's like you have to have, you can't overwork these kids essentially. Mm-hmm. But also they specifically want you to make sure that these, the athletes that you have aren't overworking themselves, because, it is a thing that they love to do, which is, any other sport doesn't necessarily have the ability where you can just keep going for extended hours because you don't have like that physical fatigue that a normal sport would. But it is something that they treat very similarly. They expect the balance that would come from having a very structured practice that would typically come from any other sport would. But it is definitely encouraged that they have practice outside of that, which is extremely beneficial for us in that regard as an esport. Mm-hmm. Like they can go and grind on their own and get results, which is something that I think is extremely useful for esports. Like there's so much they can do on their own time as well. But
I would go so far as to say it's not only nice, but it's required to be competitive. Mm-hmm. Because, like Nathan said, we can't always have these kids practicing as much as, say, a challenger team. Mm-hmm. But we want them to compete at that level still. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the time, like I have 2 players right now that are on summer break that I'm working one-on-one with all the time. And I'm encouraging them, you need to climb, you need to get higher rank, you need to be better. Because when the season comes around, if you are not at least, at this certain rank, you're going to get, destroyed. You're going to lose. Mm-hmm.
Now,
and especially...
go ahead. Finish your thought.
Especially because, Midlands right now is trying to recruit a nationally competitive esports program. And they're in a unique position to do that.
Perfect segue to my next question then. Because looking on the website, it looks like for the most part, the Midland University's esports program is relatively young, right? I think, Nathan, you mentioned it. It's actually going into the 2nd year. But in those 2 years, it's, it's not, it didn't boom, right? It's still in that infant stage, it looks like.
Right.
Right now you have what? Hearthstone and League of Legends?
And Overwatch as well.
And Overwatch.
Yep.
Is there what are the plans going forward then as far as like, or how does that work? Is it just as simple of you go to the university and say, hey, we found 5 kids who want to play Counter-Strike with us? Or does it have to be scholarship involved? What are your guys' plans in the future of kind of expanding?
Right. Yeah. And the nice thing about esports in general is like the barrier for entry is pretty easy to handle, just because if people play the game, have the game,
and most college kids, have it anyways, right?
Exactly. So very seldom do we ever have somebody who like just doesn't have an account, doesn't have the game. When those people are not really going to be going into an esport program to begin with, because they don't have the experience. Which isn't to say that's not the case all the time, because we do have some kids who come on and maybe they're doing basketball, but they say like, I'm really interested in esports. I play this and I would like to try out sometime. That happens a lot, and
really?
because we're not, we're kind of in a gray area as far as what we're limited to doing. Like it's not only Overwatch, Hearthstone, League of Legends. That's just kind of like the main 3 we kind of began with. But right. It's totally open to, one of the things we're actually looking at doing is opening up our own CSGO team. And moving forward, it's very likely we'll be doing something with Fortnite, just because they're really pushing it to be an esport ready game. And, it's hard to not, you can't ignore it essentially.
Right.
But yeah, the logistics around starting your team is, pretty blank as far as you can just kind of start it. And then when it comes to scholarshiping the students, as long as I have the team that can go and do the sport, and then there are tournaments that I can put them in, I bring that whatever number to my boss and I say, hey, I want to give these kids this amount to do this game, I have the freedom to do that, because there's no like governing body of that says like, oh yeah, we don't take that game. Like we work closely with NACE and TESPA, and then League has its kind of its own thing going, and then we got like CSL. They're branching into other games as well. But there's also so many third party tournaments that you can join in, and it's mostly about being, having that experience for kids to be athletes. And esports is really nice that there's so many different ways that you can be competitive without being like only in one tournament. There's so many different things that they can do.
I think Tim and I have some eligibility left, actually, if I'm not mistaken.
I could do it. I could always go get a second major. Why not?
I have like 3 solo wins, so
there you go.
Wow.
It is kind of wow. It is pretty crazy though. Like looking back, and we always joke about this, is that like, man, if only I was like 10 years younger, the opportunities that kids have now. I mean, I know I went to North Texas, and they just officially acknowledged like an esports club team, right? Like the university is finally looking at it. But even then, like that wasn't even around when I was a student. You had like your little group of friends, and they had, we had our little group of guys at the school that all played games, but it was never even acknowledged by the university. And the fact that like with Midland University is, I mean, I would say like the way they're handling it is, I mean, I guess time will tell, but it definitely seems to be the right way. As far as until the NCAA gets involved, and then you got you got a whole nother headache to worry about, Nathan. But until then, enjoy your freedom with that. How you said, like you kind of have that freedom just to go to the university and say, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking, a scholarship. These kids, they can represent the school. And you said third party tournaments, so it's not just collegiate tournaments.
Yeah, I mean they have the opportunity to go because we're not bound to any particular entity. So we can do go on Battlefy and do tournaments there. There's a couple of Discord servers I know for Overwatch, like Atreo, they do tournaments. It's kind of up in the air, which is exciting. But at the same time, once those governing bodies come to be, obviously we'll have to, suit up kind of a thing.
But it's kind of a nice thing though. It's I mean, I guess you could almost look at like a win or lose situation, right? You're giving up some freedom, but the fact that you have that governing body will make kids at that point, you're probably not recruiting kids just off of leaderboards. You're talking to parents at that point in time. If you're recruiting like freshmen, right? Trying to convince a kid's parent to say, hey, let your kid come here to play video games is probably a tough sell.
See, I actually want to talk a little bit about that, because we mentioned recruiting when you were speaking to Sinjin, which is that a lot of our recruiting does come online for finding like the really dedicated players, obviously.
Right.
But for a lot of the JV positions and just, general kids who are interested in esports, a lot of my recruitment comes from me actually going to high schools and meeting different clubs. A lot of times, a lot of schools don't have actual clubs yet. So I'll be talking with counselors and be like, hey, do you know where I can find the nerds, kind of a thing. But a lot of high schools are actually building their own esports programs as well. And they're starting to recognize that this is a booming thing that they really need to get in front of. And even in rural Nebraska, you'll find, I think there's at least 3 that I know that I'm in connection with right now that they have their own esports programs. They're not, some of them aren't like paid for. I can't think of the right word, but
sponsored.
Yeah, they're not sponsored, right. but they exist, and they're, who knows, they'll get sponsored probably like soon. But yeah, there is a lot of in-person recruitment that goes on, and meeting with, like, I actually have a kid in town that I know personally that I've gone out to meet his parents, because I know he's really good at one of the games that we do, and I really want him to come to this university and play for us. And so I got to sit down with the parents and talk to them and be like, hey, this is a legitimate thing, and when you come and scout out a student in person and you're wearing like a business attire, and you have also numbers to back up what you're saying by saying like, we'll offer your kid X amount of money, it changes the whole dynamic, because parents what they might consider to be ridiculous suddenly becomes legitimate in their eyes because there's money involved.
And it helps that you're not walking in shorts and flip flops, like you said. You're handling it. You're handling it like a college sport would. If a coach is walking up to a house, he's not wearing, Saturday morning clothes. He's going in at least looking professional and saying, "Hey, yes, it's video games. I acknowledge the fact that it's a little that's the trick that I always tell people with, like, if I call them esports gatekeepers, right? Where they always try to fight anyone who tries to say that esports is ridiculous, right? It's like you do have to take a step back and realize what you're doing. And you are asking someone to play video games for a living, or asking their parents especially, right? And it's like it on the surface level sounds a bit ridiculous, but to us it doesn't, right? For us it's a normal thing. So I think it's very cool on what you guys are doing over at Midland University. Nathan, I want to thank you again for reaching out to us. I think it's very, like I said, I think it's very cool that Midland University has an esports program, a scholarship program, nonetheless. But even the way that you are handling it, I think is all for the best. So I thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Sinjin, I thank you for stopping by, giving us a kind of insight on the college scouting world of esports, which is, I don't know what I was expecting, but I guess messaging people online.
Yeah, I mean, they're so far and few between.
It's pretty much all you can do at this point. So it'd be a little creepy if you start knocking on doors.
Right. No, it is challenging to find who's the star athlete, when it comes to esports. So, because obviously high schools, it's all exposure. Who's good and who's not. So
right.
It is a challenge for us to find, like, who's old or young enough to do this kind of a thing.
Right. So again, that's Midland University. If you are curious on looking at them, maybe you are a listener and you are in the age range of college and you're thinking, man, maybe I want to go play some. You could check them out, midlandathletics.com. Their Twitter, I think, is just Midland Sports, right? Midland_sports. Esports. Well, yeah. So the main one is sports, but you have your own. Midland Esports has their own. So go check them out. Keep an eye on them. I know we will. I want to thank you, gentlemen, again for coming on the show, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Good luck, guys.
Appreciate you, fellas.
Have a good one.